I never have sinus issues ever. But this morning, they went crazy. So I've been sneezing all day. My nose won't stop running. So we're going to do it's horrible, but we're going to do the best we can. We're going to trudge on because this is probably one of the craziest sections of this book. And I've been waiting all weekend to do this part. But there are a couple of things I have to say. For all of you people that are that you see out there, not you guys, hopefully you guys are all smarter than this, but I have seen tons of people talking about Dan Bongino going to Epstein Island and that he participated in the pizza party or the hot dog party or whatever in the White House. Stop it. You people are going crazy. If he did any of that, he would not be the deputy FBI director. I'm sorry. Just stop it. That is like crazy. It is bad enough that all of the guilty people are melting down with the fact that he is the deputy director of the FBI. And let me tell you, I've never watched Mark Levin. But I listened, and I don't even remember where I was at, but I'll never forget that. I didn't even know who Dan Bongino was. He filled in for Mark Levin one night on the radio show, and somebody called me, and I can't even remember who it was, and told me to listen to the show. And I listened to him basically lay out Spygate, talking about how in March of 2016, it was verified that someone had been spying. He had it all. And then obviously he went on and wrote the book, of which I have. He is not part of them. If you have not figured that out, you guys need to stop following me because it's actually an insult to our collective intelligence if you haven't figured out that he's not part of them. That's probably one of the easiest ones to have said he's in this column versus that column. A lot of people we don't know. We definitely know he has been on top of all of that this entire time. And he called it out way ahead. He had people that was giving him information from the inside that they trusted him, and they were on the inside of it. They knew whether or not to trust him or not. So come on, guys, come on. We have to do better. We can't be them. So I had to say that because I'm about ready to start just please stop following me. And I don't mean to be that arrogant, but that is so frustrating. I am not going to comment on people spazzing out about all of this crap. There's enough people to call out on our side. A lot of them. And you guys have heard me do it. I don't, anyway, I don't even want to go there. Okay, so Trump Frog, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. The same people that were promoting the Flynn network garbage and all of that are the same people. Because Dan Bongino has been down from the jump. He's been calling out those people. So how do you align them together? I love that you said that. And it's like people that, actually listen to that Mike Benz clown. If you can't smell an operator and see an operator operating, he's a Zionist. And those people that follow him sit there and they're anti-Israel, but they like Mike Benz. Just discernment is really important. And I think people need to learn to practice that and not be so personally tied. I mean, I heard someone that I kind of like in the space last night talked about, there is no plan, and all these people that say there's a plan. And I'll tell you right now, you're not rolling this administration this quickly with everything in place. And as calm as Trump has been waiting to get his 17 cabinet members appointed, and the 17th one being Cash, there wasn't a plan. People are fucking stupid. Tune those people out. It's a waste of time. Forget my language, but I've been attacked by these losers for a long time. They just can't control the narrative, so they scream and cry like babies. I'll tell you what, if they're listening, cry more.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that.
No worries, I was just going to finish with cry more.
I was trying to turn my volume up so the people on Rumble could hear you, and put my phone closer. So I.
Awesome, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Super busy. Didn't want to miss the space today. We're doing one tonight, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'll make sure to set it up.
In between my sneezes, but I'm going to definitely be there because I have some stuff that I want to share. So.
Oh, me too. Gloves are off. It's time to get down.
Yeah, I agree. Bridget, go ahead.
Start with the elderberry thing. Just saying, because I went through a month and a half of a sinus infection that was horrific. Okay, second, oh my God. Not only is it not a bad thing, the brainwashing is just so thick that people have lost the ability to think for themselves. And so when they see one screeching, it goes beyond. I'm just speechless, And in fact, not only is this not a bad thing, this is like the best thing ever. They're not just missing it, they're totally missing it. Oh my God,
so,
he has gone on and on about the right people, about Adam Schiff, about all of them. And what he has been on a tear about for years now has been the first thing Donald Trump should do is blah, 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 and arrest. And he's talking about, this is the best thing ever.
So I have to give Pragmatic the credit when he said that Dan Bongino is Kash Patel's insurance policy. He couldn't have been more correct because they can't do anything to Kash Patel because they're going to get Dan Bongino. And Dan Bongino would be much worse than Kash Patel.
He worked Secret Service during and for and with Obama and Clinton.
Do you think he doesn't know where all the bodies are buried?
Exactly. Oh my God! When it happened last night, I know I made a promise that I wouldn't send you things in the middle of the night. But oh my God, I was trying and fighting myself not to send it to you when it happened because it was so exciting.
Bridget has a habit of sending me stuff. Like I'm in the middle of an interview and she's like, bing, 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 bing. All good. All good.
You need to mute me.
Okay. I don't know how to do that, Bridget, but whatever. It's all good. I just have to turn my messages off on my laptop when I'm using my laptop for an interview. But anyway, okay. So we're going to get started because this is crazy shit. All right. So you guys know that we kind of left off with, we had just talked about the Pinkertons and these private detective / spy networks and how they had been used prior to World War II. And keep in mind how this works. So our thesis is World War II didn't change anything as far as what the International Syndicate was doing. What it did was make us pay for it. It didn't change what they were doing. So they still had coups, they still had regime changes, they still had an international syndicate, but the businesses had to collectively pay for it. So if you go back and you do the research, you have companies like the Pinkertons and some of the others we're going to get into, and the companies had to pay them to do their corporate espionage. So what World War II did was it created a central intelligence operation for the international syndicate and made it look like it was a central intelligence agency for the United States and us. And we paid for it. So they took an operating expense they had on their books, which was private intelligence, and pushed it off on the United States taxpayers. That's what they did. That's the purpose one of the many purposes of World War II was to trick us into paying for their resource stealing around the world via the Central Intelligence Agency. And you guys need to stick that in your brain. And that is the reason why dumbasses that walk around calling this thing the blob want you not to know that point. That's the most critical point of this entire exercise, is that the international syndicate, the businesses, the oligarchs, whatever you want to call them, and no, they're not all one religion, and no, they're not all in one industry. It's all of them, collectively, all of them hired intelligence to do regime change where they wanted resources or a market. They used law firms like Sullivan and Cromwell to orchestrate this. They used the unions the same way they did post-World War II, but they had to pay for it. So when they created USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, we paid for it. Okay? That's like a foot stomper for me. And because when you talk about the international syndicate being number one, international is not just the United States, and number two, it being a criminal syndicate, you then are required to name names as they come up. Like we named ITT, like we named PepsiCo, like we named Freeport, like we named Ford and Carnegie and Kaiser. And every story that we tell where we know who they are, we name them. We don't call them a fucking blob, okay? That's bullshit. But when someone tries to tell you this story and they blur, it's like showing an arrest and blurring out the criminal's picture. No, I want that plastered on a billboard. I want everybody to know what these people are doing, okay? You cannot hide behind a nondescript term to call these people out for what they've done, because there's millions of dead bodies and there are faces that need to be held accountable. All right, so I'm going to get off my soapbox and we're going to finish. We're going to start the book review. All right, so part 9. So for the rest of the 19th century, the United States government's ability to conduct criminal investigations was limited. It had only taken, it only had a few limited purviews like the U.S. Marshal Service to support federal courts, the Postal's Inspection Investigation Fraud Unit, Secret Service, and Special Agency Service in Customs to track counterfeiting and other revenue-related crimes. As a result, the Department of Justice would continue to rely on outsourcing their intelligence operation like Pinkerton's and other national detective agencies such as Burns and Thiel. Now, I posted several posts about Burns and Thiel. If you haven't read them, you guys need to go, because Bridget archived them under threads on my pinned post. Please go read them, because you're going to find out Burns and Thiel basically are crooks. They're like Halliburton's, only of intelligence. And I wanted to do an in-depth dive on that. I'm not going to go over them during this period, but I wanted to put that information out because it's incredibly important that you understand who they were hiring because of the fact that they were supporting the international syndicate. Burns and Thiel had been working for corporate America doing intelligence. It makes our point that then the DOJ was hiring them and basically taking what they had been doing and embedding them into the government's employee and putting them on our dime. So this is illustrating the point that I've tried to make through this entire series of revealing Operation Gladio. So God bless this guy for writing this book. Intelligence capabilities were even more limited. The Office of the Naval Intelligence, ONI, established in 1888, was the nation's first true permanent intelligence services. However, it was tiny in comparison to these large corporate intelligence agencies. And it had no covert capability until World War I. Things began to change in the early 1900s because that's when they set up the FBI. The FBI was originally the Bureau of Investigations, BI, not FBI, just BI. It was originally set up in 1908, but it was not until World War I that it massively expanded to encompass a large intelligence capability. During the 19 months of World War I, the Bureau of Investigations grew from an agency of about 300 with no counterintelligence capability to 1,500 employees. The ONI swelled from 300 officers during World War I from having just a few dozen. And the Army created a military intelligence division that went from one officer to 1,700 employees, backed by 350,000 badge-carrying civilian agents around, around the country. This sudden, massive rise in intelligence capability ensured that the government would be forced to look to private institutions for help, like training and stuff. And while national detective agencies like Pinkerton's and Thiel were used at times, more often than not, the auxiliaries were private patriotic organizations like the American Legion and its even more militant predecessor, the American Protective League. Now, again, I went in depth into the American Protective League all day today. So if you've not read those threads, go read them. The American Protective League was basically the Phoenix program during World War I. It is incredible what these people were doing. They were breaking into people's homes. They were stealing people's shit. They were paying people to rat out their neighbors. It is the most incredible thing. And I knew nothing about this until I started reading about this in this book. So I wanted to put all that out there because if you guys remember the story about Smedley Butler, when we were talking originally, like 2 years ago, about Anthony Sutton, and the what most people say was they were going to coup FDR, like FDR was a good guy, but he wasn't, and they weren't going to coup him. The plot that the American Legion, the same American Legion that used to be the Protective League, that was basically Nazis inside of the United States breaking into people's homes and ratting out their neighbors. It actually had a youth area too. That American Legion had approached Smedley Butler to create basically a private army, and they were going to nominate a prior general officer to act as an administrator. They were basically going to have like a second vice president. And that second vice president was going to be like an administrator, like a dictator. So the president was going to be more like a prime minister figurehead. They were literally going to change our entire government. And Smedley Butler told them to piss up a rope. But it was the American Legion that they went to with this plot. And I had always wondered about that. Why would they go to the American Legion? Well, now you know, because there were a bunch of Nazis before Nazis was even invented in the American Legion. Back to the book. The private sector was never truly absent from the U.S. intelligence community, even at the height of the public security state. But during the era of private organizations, principally used rather than for-profit businesses. It was not until World War II, and especially during the Cold War, that the for-profit businesses once again became an integral part of the U.S. intelligence capability. One trailblazer was Booz Allen Hamilton, which we all know as a CIA front. The self-described management consulting firm was well established, though, by the time we get to the CIA, doing the exact same shit that they did for the CIA, but they were actually founded in 1914. And by 1940, it was hired by the US military to prepare for war. Booz Allen Hamilton was hired by the US military to prepare them for war. Booz Allen Hamilton has never revealed exactly what that consisted of. But by 1947, it received its first contract from the United States Air Force. And guys, the Air Force was created in 1947. So the very first thing they do is hire Booz Allen Hamilton. It was millions of dollars worth of quote unquote contracting, consulting work for electronic intelligence. While Booz Allen Hamilton would continue the management consulting racket for private corporations in post-war years, it was increasingly beginning to focus on intelligence, to the point that by the 21st century, Bloomberg had dubbed it the most profitable spy organization in the world. In the early years, Booz Allen Hamilton's intelligence contributions theoretically consisted of providing their management principles to technical issues facing the intelligence community. But it was actually much deeper. The famed CIA officer Miles Copeland was allegedly employed by Booz Allen Hamilton, currently during much of his intelligence career as quote unquote unofficial cover. In other words, Miles Copeland, who we come across in several Operation Gladio overthrows of governments, was embedded in Booz Allen Hamilton the entire time he was a CIA officer. Copeland operated throughout the Middle East, including Syria, where he was the CIA station chief, Egypt, Lebanon, Iran, and Iraq. What do those all have in common? We've cooed them all. While working at Booz Allen Hamilton, Copeland was involved in the 1953 overthrow of Mossadegh, because of course he was. Which the author notes that obviously he was there carrying out covert operations with none other than Kermit Roosevelt. The privatization of security functions traditionally reserved for military and intelligence personnel began in earnest as soon as the Cold War began, which was immediately in the aftermath. Well, actually, it began before World War II even over with the Iron Curtain statement. And of course, that goes in line with the 3 world wars that the Fabian Society forecasted in the late 1800s, which, of course, weirdly enough, is kind of where we started this part of the whole story in the late 1800s. So the fact that all of these things kind of all mesh on a timeline is not a coincidence. So, the private sector has long been used by both the UK and the US to conduct espionage. Traditionally, however, this was achieved through the use of front companies, businesses created by intelligence agencies to carry out its agenda. One such instance was Mission Impossible-like private detective agency founded by a former intelligence agents during the Cold War. And the one that the author mentions is Robert A. Mayhew Associates. Now, for those of you who pay attention, I just posted a thread about Robert A. Mayhew. And I don't know, there's a very long document. It's an FBI, still a lot of it redacted, which is ridiculous. Robert A. Mayhew was basically the guy, and he's in everything. He's in the mobs, in Las Vegas, in Los Angeles, in Miami, in Chicago. He was the agent for Howard Hughes. That FBI document's 130 pages, but I do recommend when you are bored, go read it. It's crazy. And this is the guy. He was a former, quote unquote, former FBI agent, which basically, excuse me, gave him his credibility to get these jobs. So dipping someone that you're going to use as an intelligence asset into the FBI to get his street creds, and then going and using him, embedding him in industrial companies to do your business is part of the mode that the CIA uses. So, Robert A. Mayhew was the basis for the entire Mission Impossible series. I had no idea. The firm's namesake is well remembered for managing Howard Hughes's vast empire during the 1960s. And guess where he happened to live in the 1960s? In Los Angeles, in the Valley. You know, like Laurel Canyon area. And then he eventually moves to the Pacific Palisades. Yeah, that area. After he was initially hired during the prior decade to keep tabs on the reclusive billionaire's girlfriends. But the former FBI agent cut his teeth in the private security racket doing work for the CIA. What did I just tell you? Founded in 1954, the detective agency was soon put on a $500 a month retainer by the CIA. It was enlisted almost immediately to run dirty tricks against the Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. Yeah, the one Jackie Kennedy marries? Yeah, that guy. He was hired to scuttle recent arrangements that he had made with Saudi Arabia that affected U.S. access to oil from the Gulf state. He had been given a contract for the shipping of the Gulf oil, and he was not under the CIA's control. So the only people that were allowed to do the shipping was people that were under the CIA's control for the Rockefeller people so that they could dictate terms. So they just sicked the CIA on him. During the early 60s, Mayhew was being used by the CIA to arrange for Castro to be assassinated by the mafia, which would be weird because he supposedly was running the casinos. Oh, that's right, the casinos that moved to Las Vegas from Cuba. Oh, and by the way, when he eventually was gotten rid of, Mo Dalitz was his replacement, out the known gangster. So what's that make Mayhew if he was replaced by a gangster? At the other end of the spectrum, there were nationwide security companies, some of which were called Burns Security and Pinkerton. They had their origins as national detective agencies and were principally used to oppress labor movements. For our purposes here, it is a security company founded the same year as Mayhew's Mission Impossible detective agency that provides the further evidence of a private sector black ops capability. Like Mayhew, George Wackenhut was also a former FBI agent. Sensing a pattern here? But the trajectory of his business, Wackenhut, founded as Wackenhut Corporation, would lead to a much different direction. By the mid-1980s, it was a large independent security company in the country. The largest, Wackenhut is known for its guard services. It guarded everything from rest stops in Florida to U.S. Atomic Energy Commission test sites in Nevada to include Area 51, which is where Margaret, those are probably the guards that were guarding her property. They were probably, if they were not active duty military, Wackenhut employees. From early on, Wackenhut had been used as a subversive purpose. One of its specialties was the compiling of files on American citizens. Oh, you mean like the same files that the predecessor to the American Legion was collecting on the neighbors? Yeah, exact same thing. By 1965, it had amassed the names of 2.5 million quote unquote dissidents, like terrorists, like January 6 people. By the next year, it was reputed to have over 4 million files on 4 million Americans. The growth over the span of 1 year was spurred by the procurement of files from Carl Barslag, Barslaag, a former staff member of the U.S. House of Representatives who had participated in the un-American activities. The dissidents were largely suspected, quote unquote, communist or quote unquote subversives or sympathizers in the eyes of Wackenhut, not by a legal process, not by a judicial process, but by Wackenhut. So if you couldn't legally collect information on someone, you hire Wackenhut and they do it for you. Nothing that is going on today is new. They have been doing this bullshit forever. As the 1960s rolled on, other derogatory types were added to the list to include anti-war, civil rights. Wackenhut had the largest privately held collection of files on suspected dissidents in all of the United States. By 1975, Congress had begun an investigation into private companies maintaining files on American citizens. This spurred Wackenhut to turn its files over to the quote-unquote anti-communist Church League of America. What? Anti-communist makes the hair on the back of your neck go up. We'll have more on them later. Though the corporation still reserved the right to look at those files anytime they wanted. Where better to hide files? Wackenhut had long maintained close ties with the U.S. intelligence community. Its board of directors has at one time or another included former FBI Director Clarence Kelly, former CIA Director William Rayburn, former Secretary of Defense and CIA Deputy Director Frank Carlucci, former DIA Director General Joseph Carroll, and former NSA Director and CIA Deputy Director Bobby Ray Inman. In other words, Wackenhut was an off-the-books CIA operation to collect domestic information on all of us. After being rebuffed by the Canadian government in the 1980s over a business venture leading the MPs to label the company a CIA front, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, Justin's dad, even went so far as to say, we got rid of the CIA. We don't want them back. To be sure, there has been much speculation over the years that Wackenhut was being used to run covert operations both domestically and overseas, because they were. During the 80s, at the height of the Iran-Contra, it was also said that Wackenhut was being used to train paramilitary forces in South and Central America, because they were. In El Salvador alone, Wackenhut had 1,500 employees there in 1985. They were engaged in businesses that were described as, quote, things you wouldn't want your mom to know about, unquote, by a former international operations director for the company. Wackenhut was involved in a scheme to kidnap a U.S. ambassador in El Salvador around the same time that was going to be blamed on the reformers in El Salvador, another false flag. Wackenhut was engaged in establishing a weapons manufacturing facility in the California-based Indian reservation in the early 1980s. Now, what you guys may remember is that's part of the octopus papers that was being researched. That was part of it, the Promise software, all of that stuff. Because the guy that supposedly modified the Promise software for the back doors for the CIA piece was on the same Indian reservation and was being employed by Wackenhut during that time. The facility sought to produce both conventional weapons such as assault and sniper rifles, portable rocket systems, and night vision scopes, and communication equipment. Okay, hold on. Let's stop right there. Oh, well, wait a minute. Also, explosive poison gases and biological weapons. Okay, so let's just stop right there. When we first got into Operation Gladio, what was in the caches that were found in Italy? Rifles, communication equipment, explosives, rockets, and money. So you're telling me that Wackenhut was producing all of those things on an Indian reservation in California to include weapons of mass destruction? Yes, they were doing that. So then the next question needs to be, who are they doing it for? Are these located in the United States? Were these our stay behind unit caches of weapons? Because when it was discovered they were doing this, supposedly these weapons were all being shipped out to the Contras. And if you believe that, I have Swampland in Florida for you. Because it has been long assumed that organizations like these, activities like these, are where weapons were getting to other CIA operations. Okay. They did have one of the South American leaders actually visit the facility that was in the middle of the death squad debacle that the CIA was also funding. So there's definitely a tie to Operation Condor. Easily the most disturbing allegation concerning Wackenhut involved in its activities in Belgium during the 1980s. At the time, Belgium was in the middle of the so-called bloody 80s because we talked about the Brabant massacres that was happening there where they were shooting women and children in grocery stores. Yeah, Wackenhut was involved in that too. The attacks were widely linked to the fascist militia known as the Westland New Post, an organization initially led by an asset of the American Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, known as Paul Latinus, Latinus. This has led to much speculation about Western intelligence agencies and the stay-behind attacks, what we refer to as Operation Gladio. During the 80s, Wackenhut would be linked to the Westland New Post. It employed one of the Westland New Post's most notorious members, Marcel Barbier, Barbier. In 1987, Barbier was convicted of a double homicide committed in 1981. While working as a guard for Wackenhut in 1982, a synagogue was bombed in Brussels on his watch. In 1983, plans of the synagogue detailing points of access were found during a search of his residence. Wackenhut's local director in Belgium at the time was a curious individual known as Jean Francis Calmette, Calmette. He was none other than a member of the French OAS, which is the same organization that Otto Skorzeny trained and had at least 2, maybe 4 agents in Dallas, Texas in 1963 during the Kennedy assassination. So, yeah, this guy is a member of the stay behind units that Otto Skorzeny trained in France. And he just so happens to be hired by Wackenhut to be a representative of theirs, an employee of theirs in Belgium during the same time that a massacre is happening in order to intimidate the Belgian people not want NATO in their country. That too is not a coincidence. Calmette was a suspected member of the Westland New Post as well. He was not only employed, he not only employed additional Westland New Post members into his unit at Wackenhut there, but he also provided combat training to them all. So he was running his own terrorist training camp in Belgium as a Wackenhut employee. So there's no misunderstanding that Wackenhut was a CIA front. None. The Westland New Post connection to Wackenhut, along with founder Paul Latinus' relationship with Belgian intelligence and the American DIA and CIA, indicates some type of covert operation was being carried out by a combination of the public and private sector. Combined with Wackenhut's role in Latin America during the 80s, Operation Condor, which allegedly involved arming and training paramilitary forces there, you have no other conclusion to draw other than the fact that Wackenhut was part of the CIA front. While the private sector has always been used to wage covert operations by the modern U.S. intelligence community, as an example of Robert Mayhew illustrates, it was not until the 70s that things really began to take off. In the post-Watergate era, numerous high-ranking military and intelligence officers were purged from the government. The CIA was especially hit hard. In 1974, more than 12,000 senior officials were made to retire by Director James Schlesinger. 3 years later, during the Carter administration, an even larger wave was forced into retirement under CIA Director Turner. Turner came down especially hard on the clandestine covert operations, which is basically where all of them came from, because Jimmy Carter wanted to get rid of that capability. In 1977, he ordered 823 positions slashed, called the Halloween Massacre. At the same time, the CIA came under increasing public scrutiny because of the Church Commission and the Pike Commission, and they're being outed for domestic surveillance, like we just described, having files on people and stuff like that. That's when the permanent select committees was set up under for intelligence, which have done no good whatsoever. This eventually led to the Intelligence Oversight Act of 1980. These two factors allegedly crippled the CIA's covert activity, but it didn't, because what we know is they just set up all of this outside of the official CIA in private security. By the end of the 60s, the obscure Mission Impossible-like detective agencies that had been so popular during the Cold War began to give way to corporate giants. Wackenhut itself went public in 1965. It was followed by Intertel and one of my favorites, Kroll, Kroll Associates, which came up in Operation Gladio repeatedly because they're a CIA front, giving the private intelligence industry a more corporate orientation. This is at the same time the private military corporations began to emerge as well. What exactly constitutes the first private military company is debatable. There's an argument that the first American volunteer group, more commonly known as the Flying Tigers, was the first. The Flying Tigers, as you guys all know, was Claire Chennault's and William Pawley's effort to begin flying in Southeast Asia, and basically was doing all of the drug trades with Chiang Kai-shek. The Flying Tigers was essentially a private air force that flew quote unquote combat missions against the Japanese on behalf of they refer to it as the Chinese government. It was not on behalf of the Chinese government. It was on behalf of Chiang Kai-shek in 41 and 42, prior to the U.S. even entering World War II. The Tigers were staffed almost entirely with U.S. military personnel and pilots, like actually on active duty pilots. In the post-war years, the assets of the Flying Tigers would largely be transferred to the Civil Air Transport, CAT, which was a registered company in Delaware, but was a CIA front. Eventually, CAT changed its name to Air America, and still a CIA proprietary company, was linked to all the drug trafficking. While there were rumors that CAT/Air America was used in some type of a combat role for the CIA covert operations in Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, all of the actual flights were logged as logistical support, which is bullshit. Generally, WatchGuard International is considered to be the first true private military company. It was founded by Special Air Services, SAS, founder Sir David Stirling and John Woodhouse in the UK. WatchGuard was established in 1965. The SAS is the UK's most elite special forces unit, specializing in covert guerrilla warfare and counterinsurgency. They are generally considered to be among the most elite special forces in the world, and was said to be the inspiration for the Green Berets and the Delta Force. For decades, the SAS has provided the backbone of contractors for British private military companies. This shadowy network of former SAS men working at various private military companies came to be known as the Circuit. WatchGuard was a trailblazer. Its first operation was in where? Yemen. It also did work for the governments of Saudi Arabia, Sierra Leone, and Zambia. The Six-Day War, which pitted several of WatchGuard's would-be clients against one another, proved to be a financial disaster from which the company never completely recovered. After a botched operation in Libya, Sterling would wind down WatchGuard in 1972. And what's interesting about that is 1972 seems to have been a very pivotal year for everything covert, because 1972-ish is when we see the BCCI bank created. We see the Nugent-Hann bank created. So there was a reshuffling of the deck, if you will, and the movement of how they were going to conduct these operations. So while WatchGuard may have went away, BCCI, which by the way, their main office was in the UK, and I don't think that's a coincidence, suddenly got born. And what was it doing? Financing all the same shit. Throughout the 1970s, a legion of British private military corporations closely linked to the SAS would spring up. One of them, most notably, was Control Risk Limited, which is still active today. The company began as a subsidiary of A1 Insurance Agency in 1975. It was originally intended to specialize in kidnap and ransom insurance. What? Wait a minute. Wait just a minute. They have a company that's going to specialize in kidnap and ransom insurance, and it's created by the same people that kidnap and ransom people? What the hell? Yes, that's what was going on. That is what you refer to as a money laundering operation, guys. Upon hiring former SAS Major Arish, Arish, Turtle, like literally turtle, Turtle, as the managing director, it gained access to SAS pipeline of contractors. Another crucial early player was Keeny Meany Services. I'll spell that. KEENI-MEENIE Services. It was referred to as KMS as an acronym. KMS was described as Swahili's for movement of snake through the grass, or a kind of South Arabian slang meaning clandestine or under the counter. Okay. KMS was managed by former SAS man David Walker, who had first broken into the private security racket while working at Control Risk. And an SAS group officer, Andrew Nightingale, was part of the original cast. Both men would later go on to manage Saladin Security, which was another SAS private military company. The relationship between KMS and SAS was so close that KMS was sometimes referred to as the 24 SAS, meaning the 24th Regiment, because it was a front company. KMS was linked to a host of dubious dealings, including training Sri Lankan soldiers in counterinsurgency techniques, aiding Ian Smith's apartheid government in Rhodesia, which is now referred to as Zimbabwe, and reputedly conducting assassination operations in Lebanon. So, in other words, this is another front company for Operation Gladio. For the purposes here, it is most interesting to note that Oliver North enlisted KMS to work with the Contras in Nicaragua, including sabotage operations targeting Soviet-made helicopters. This is likely one of the earliest uses of private military companies by agents of the US government to conduct covert operations. Well, it isn't the first use of them to conduct covert operations, but maybe the first use of a UK one. Sterling himself got back into the game in the mid-1980s. He helped establish Kilo Alpha Services, more commonly referred to as KAS Enterprises. Sterling was the chairman of KAS, while the managing director was Ian Crook. He also was an SAS former member and led their terrorism warfare efforts. Well, that's lucky because they're going to be conducting a lot of terrorism. KAS has been described as the Rolls-Royce of British security companies. During the late 80s, KAS gained notoriety when it was enlisted by, Bridget, are you sitting down?
Yes.
They were enlisted by the World Wildlife Fund.
Of course they were.
To conduct a covert operation codenamed Project Lock. Lock was officially an anti-smuggling operation that was conducted supposedly to stop the smuggling of rhino horns, which we covered in our WWF expose, because that's not at all what they were doing. They were setting up terrorist training camps all along that area, and most of the animals that got damaged were damaged by landmines and all kinds of other shit that they set up under the guise of a WWF, World Wildlife Foundation, World Wildlife Fund project. They built extensive warehousing to keep weapons in on national parks designated as UNESCO sites. They used all of that shit. UNESCO, World, WWF, all of that is involved in Operation Gladio. There are also indications that KAS Lock team was infiltrated from early on by the apartheid South Africa's Civil Cooperation Bureau, of which we're going to cover in a minute. As such, there had been persistent allegations that KAS activities of part of Operation Lock were geared towards destabilizing neighboring African governments and targeting the African National Congress working to end apartheid in South Africa. And that's exactly what they were doing, because these warehouses in these national parks were all along border areas. And they designated these national parks along the border areas so they could conduct cross-border operations and destabilize newly, quote unquote, freed African countries in order to make apartheid South Africa look more appealing as a stable government. So the white population in South Africa were staging attacks into newly freed African Black leaders to destabilize their countries to make them look better. Look, you don't want to overthrow us because we're the only stable, quote unquote, democracy in all of South Africa. All of these other people don't know what they're doing, and their countries are all falling apart because they're really bad leaders. No, you're fucking killing them and destabilizing the countries by killing the population and launching terror attacks into them to destabilize them to make yourself look better. That's exactly what was going on. Another curious aspect of the British private security industry was its close ties to none other than organizations like Le Cercle. And I have done a lot of posting about Le Cercle, or The Circle, Panay's Circle, however you want to say it, and their kissing cousin, the Bilderberg. Le Cercle emerged in 1950s through an effort of mainland European elites closely linked to reactionary Catholic orders and Western intelligence, because they all worked together. By the late 70s, Le Cercle featured a strong presence in the UK, especially of veterans of World War II Special Operations Executive, SOE. Early on, the close ties between the Cercle complex and British private security industry was quite close. While not a member of the Cercle, David Sterling was a very close friend of Lord Julian Amery, Amery, who became the Circle's chairman by the by the 1980s. During the early 60s, Amory, Sterling, and other future Circle members like Neil Billy McLean, who was also an SOE veteran, conspired to deploy former SAS troops to Yemen to aid the royalist factions that had recently been deposed and stop advances of Nasser's Egyptian forces. Sterling's work in Yemen would lay the foundation for WatchGuard International and the British private military company that followed it. Now, remember, because I've covered Yemen, Yemen had people inside of Yemen that wanted the UK out. Nasser, which is why they had to get rid of him, inspired Yemen because Nasser took back the Suez Canal and kicked the British out. They couldn't allow that to stand because you're not allowed to manage your own country. You're not allowed to manage your own resources. And you sure as hell are not allowed to kick the UK out of your country, just like you're not allowed to kick the US out. So Yemen was inspired by that, and they had basically the indigenous people of Yemen want to kick the UK out. And the royal family in Yemen was in bed with the UK. So they basically overthrew their country. And the Saudi Arabian and the UK, because of course they had concessions for the oil, collaborated to squeeze Yemen because Saudi Arabia is just north of Yemen. And the UK basically owned Aden, the port on the south side. So they had already been kicked out of Egypt and they couldn't afford to lose Aden. And so they basically were conspiring to create turmoil in Yemen. And if you recall, that was the diversion to get the 75,000 Egyptian troops out of Egypt in order for Israel to attack Egypt in retribution for what they had done to the UK. They collectively all worked together. You will never find a situation where they don't all work together. Okay. Control Risk Limited also forged close ties to the Circle complex. Its connections to the Institute for the Study of Conflict, because they create it, so they're going to study it, so they can create more. The ISC, the Institute for the Study of Conflict, such an oxy-fucking-moron, sorry, was founded by Brian Cozier, and we keep coming across him. He was linked to both MI6 and the CIA. He would also serve as the chairman for the Circle during the 1980s. Several of the ISC researchers would later go on to work for Control Risk. Isn't that such a small world? Most notably, South African specialist Peter Janke, Janke, and counterinsurgency proponent Major General Richard Clutterbuck. I think I would call him Clutterfuck, but anyway. As we shall see, the relationship between the British private security industry and the Circle complex will continue. One other trailblazer in the early private security racket was Otto Skorzeny, because of course, who he co-founded Paladin Group on the model of Sterling's WatchGuard. Even before Paladin was established in the 60s, Skorzeny appears to have been working as a privateer for years. During the mid-1950s, Skorzeny had been enlisted by German intelligence and the CIA, whose top official at the time in Egypt was none other than Booz Allen Hamilton's Miles Copeland, to train the Egyptian security forces in the wake of Nasser's coup. Skorzeny proceeded to bring in more than 100 German advisors to Egypt, many of them former SS men, among them Harmet von Schubert, Schubert, who would go on to be a manager at Paladin. One particular task Scorzini and his advisors were engaged in training the Egyptian special forces that would later be used for raids into Israel. And what's interesting about this is there's a lot of people and a lot of documentation actually that believes these trained Egyptians were basically outside of Nasser's command and control and were gladio cells that would cross-border operate into Israel to create false flags that gave Israel the pretense to attack. So, a lot of documentation on that, if you guys are interested. At some point in the 50s, Scorzini and several of his former compatriots formed a corporation that specialized in arming and training troops in covert operations, i.e. Gladio. The name of this corporation is unknown. Sure. It was his construction company. We all know that. But it managed a school in rural Spain. And by rural Spain, they mean up near the French border, which is where he set up all of his schools because the OAS was one of his biggest customers. Among their clients was also U.S. Army Special Forces, who were schooled in Scorzini's commando tactics in the 1960s. Other elite Western forces were also trained there because they're gladio camps. Researcher Martin Lee even described Scorzini's operation in Spain during the early 60s as a Paladin base camp. While it was certainly possible that Paladin grew out of that effort, because it did, Paladin was described as the most serious of all private intelligence and action services available because it's Operation Gladio. It's a NATO paid-for operation. It had an international scope. It conducted in operations not only in Spain itself, but Greece and even as far as South Vietnam, which we know. Paladin recruited from the ranks of former SS men, OAS terrorists, Italian fascists, among others, to include Nazis. The British affiliate was none other than Sterling's watchguard outfit. The British affiliate with Otto Scorzini was watchguard. What time is it? Okay, that's a good place that we can stop because we're going to get into another kind of lengthy, more of the private military companies, but some new ones. So that kind of is a good place to stop right there. So we're going to open it up. Anybody wants to request a mic, they're more than welcome to. Because that was a lot.
How they crisscross and crisscross and crisscross. And they still do this today. You know, people are covering stuff that is historic, documented, well proven, well recorded. And remember, the World Wildlife Foundation is still running today. And there is no logical reason why they wouldn't be doing the same thing they were doing then. Because they've never been
held accountable.
Never been held, yeah, right. Never been held accountable. There's never been charges. They've never stopped them. So I don't see any logical reason why they wouldn't continue what they're doing today.
Well, there's still African leaders that are being overthrown. There are still leaders like Slovakia that are being assassinated. So I guarantee you they are still doing it. SR-71 and then Stellar.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone for attending. We really appreciate it as we go through history. One thing I'll note about today and today's subject and where we're at is up to this point, a lot of the discussions we've had have been about Americans and what Americans are doing in this field. Today, we're talking about the British, and it's a worldwide phenomenon. And it's not just Americans, it's not just British, it's not just Mossad, it's all of the international syndicates along with Operation Gladness. Thank you, Colonel.
Sure. Stellar, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think that there's anything that they haven't put their hands in. They're so bad, and these globalists need to just be done. I mean, do you think with the U.S. AID and a lot of these other things that a lot of these different funded coups through Operation Gladio and the international syndicate will start slowing down before it gets completely wiped out? Because we know that, the government's getting cleaned out.
Well, if they don't have the funding source immediately, I would say yes unequivocally, but here's my hesitation. They still have a conduit for money. They still have money laundering, and they are still selling drugs. So while you can cut out their funding from the taxpayer's perspective, we are not cutting out their funding completely. So go ahead.
Yeah, because I just saw that, apparently Biden's Bitcoin wallet or something like that got hacked or whatever. It's, and then we know what happened with Ethereum. So I have a feeling there's a lot of, Ethereum was like an exchange wallet. So, but, as things go on, and they start getting, because there's so much money that seems like they've been doing it for so long that they've got money hidden in so many different places and shell companies and things, and I guess I just keep hoping that they turn the faucet off and it's just going to stop. And
it will, but I don't think we're at that point yet. I think we have still another year of revelations. And then I think you have the next year of charging and proceedings to hold people accountable. But it all has to be revealed. And we're revealing shit that has accumulated over the last 100 years. So it's not going to happen overnight.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm very, very happy that Dan Bongino got called to be the assistant with Cash. And also the fact that he's been, he was with Fox News, of course, and then he took over Rush Limbaugh's stuff. I think that that's a good, and he'll probably do a lot of talking about what's going on too. So I think that he's a really, really good candidate for it.
I agree. Okay.
Bridget has her hand up.
Go ahead, Bridget.
Richard was trying to ask a question, and he's having trouble connected, so he sent me a message to ask. And I was scrolling to get it. Who does the Colonel think is really behind directing all the Gladio ops and the cover-ups of the multi-generations? The strategic planners, not people like Kissinger or Bush, but the multi-generational command structure.
Well, I think that's kind of why Warhamster and I are going through the secret societies. There are generational families behind all of this. And do I know who all of them? No, I don't. I think there's two layers, actually. I think there's a layer like the Wallenbergs that most people don't even know about. The Medicis. There's some very, very old families. But I think the mid-level international syndicates of the names that we do know, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Carnegies, that old money, what we think of as the City of London and the Northeast money, that are tied to secret societies like Skull and Bones. I think that's kind of like the second tier, the face of the international syndicate. Because what you find is when you start doing research, as a matter of fact, I'll just like skip ahead a little bit. One of, actually, I think I have it bookmarked. One of the companies that keeps coming up as a funder of a bunch of this stuff is the old Sears and Roebuck. If you look up that general, I think his name's Robert Woods, he was instrumental in a lot of the syndicate corrupt prior to World War II manipulation of things. And I was astonished at that. The other names are kind of familiar names like Ford and Carnegie, like I said, Kaiser. One of my very first research things back when I was just looking at Anthony Sutton books before I ever found Operation Gladio, and realizing there was even an international syndicate around, I ran across Kaiser. And when you look at Kaiser, who was a big aluminum king, well, one of the byproducts, which is hazardous waste because it's poison, of aluminum is fluoride. And you start looking at the fact that they then decided that they are going to put fluoride in the water, which then would distribute almost kind of like the whole the cancer being found around the Manhattan Project. And then they fluorinate, and it was actually Kaiser who funded the study that was used, and the guy that was embedded in the government. And at the time, I want to say that because it was commerce related, like we just said, we're talking about how the counterfeiting used to be in the Treasury. For whatever reason, the guy was embedded in the Treasury that quote unquote commissioned the study, which was done at a Kaiser funded university, that basically said that fluoride was great for your teeth, that it kept decay from happening, which was absolutely not true. And by the way, it was later discovered that that guy was paid, like back in the day, in the early 1900s, like $700,000 for the couple of years he was embedded in the government to quote unquote publish this study that was done at a Kaiser university. And then Kaiser turned around and created the largest medical facility in the entire country, Kaiser Permanente, because he knew he was poisoning everybody. That's not even a lie. That's absolutely true. So here's a guy that's producing fluoride as a byproduct, selling it to put in people's water, knowing that it's going to poison them, and then creating a medical monstrosity to treat all the illnesses that you're going to get from drinking the poison that he generated, that he doesn't have to pay someone to dispose of now because he's basically selling it to all of the local governments. SR 71.
Thank you, Colonel. I just want to give a shout out here real quick for those that asked the question of where the top resides. The Colonel did mention she's doing a series with Warhamster on her Rumble channel dealing with Skull and Bones, and you'll find out. I highly recommend you go listen to what's going on here, because it is a very closely knit type group, and they are very high up in our institutions, yet they are not at the very top. That's painfully clear. What we don't know is who really is at the very top, whether it's a group of people or whether it's a single person, a single entity. We still haven't figured that out, but we're on the track.
Well, and keep in mind where this all generated from. In the Fabian Society, their idea to create one world government was to have a leader from each section of the world that they divided up, by the way, to form like a council that was going to sit literally at a round table and decide what all happened to the world from then on. And they said back in the late 1800s that it was going to take 3 world wars in order to scare everybody into basically the third way. They were going to use communism and fascism as a way to herd all of the people into the third way. They would use wars to kill people because they wanted to control populations. Meanwhile, experiment on people, crossbreed people. They talked about all of this in order to come up with the highest work specimen of people that would generate activity for them to be wealthy and in charge, and the rest of us basically be enslaved. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, Colonel, a couple questions. One, did you say the Wahlbergs, the ones in Sweden?
Wallenbergs.
Wallenbergs, okay. Yeah, I have a bad name memory, but they're the ones from Sweden,
Correct.
right? Okay. And the other thing is, I tweeted at you some data about Rockefeller's father that was a snake oil salesman.
Right. Yeah, that's all covered in that book, Thy Will Be Done. The origins of that family. Literally, he was a snake oil salesman. Yeah, that's crazy. Bridget and then Stellar.
Okay, just kind of an add-on. Richard was asking about decisions being handed out and so on. Can you just briefly, and this, we get a lot of new followers. We have a lot of new people in here. The Gladio connection to NATO and that type of.
Sure. Rhonda just said over on Rumble, just watched And We Know. I don't know what that is. And LT played one of your clips. Oh, well, that's cool. I don't know who that is. I'll look them up after the show. But thank you for letting me know that. I'll have to write that down because I won't be able to see the notes. And we know. All right. So basically, after World War II, obviously, they set up NATO. And NATO embedded the Reinhard Gehlen stay-behind networks into NATO and began developing all of the stay-behind capabilities in all of Europe and the United States. And then there was a secret agreement that said, a pledge, that if you enter NATO, you have to agree to have stay-behind units. Because NATO had to be able to control your country, or you can't come in. And the way they controlled your country, was by the use of the stay-behind networks. They could create terrorism inside of your country at the flip of a switch. They could interfere in elections. So you are not allowed to be an autonomous country if you're a member of NATO. And the organization was called the CPC, the Clandestine Planning Committee. The subordinate one was ACC, the Allied Clandestine Committee. Sorry. And basically, these operations were orchestrated, coordinated out of NATO. In addition to that, they had set up, for lack of a better way of saying it, literally, we just talked about several of them, terrorist training camps. Otto Skorzeny was commissioned to be the lead trainer because he had trained the stay-behind units for Hitler during World War II under Reinhard Gehlen. Gehlen was installed in West Germany's um, office of the BND, which is the CIA counterpart in West Germany. Now, Reinhard Gehlen was an intelligence chief Nazi for Hitler. No one can explain how one of the most significantly high-placed Nazis ended up as the chief of intelligence in the denazified West German government, except to say that the Nazis were never defeated at all. And that's very, very important to the whole premise that when you take all of the operators in Europe, the Otto Skorzenis, the Mengele from the Nazi past, the colony dignity that we just covered, all of those aspects of Nazism all found their way to Latin America under Operation Condor. And you find all of the exact same people that were doing Operation Gladio in Europe in Latin America. So you can't, on any stretch of the imagination, not say those two operations are not kissing cousins, because they were orchestrated by the same foundational people. And early on in this expose, we found several of the training camps, like Sardinia, off the coast of Italy. They used the Canary Islands as their scuba water espionage training camp. But they were literally littered all over. There was a ton of them in Turkey. There was some of them in, like I said, in Spain, because at the time, which was critical to this whole thing, Spain was a fascist country under the dictatorship of Franco. So a lot of the Nazis, when they immediately left the European, German occupation of France and blah, 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 they escaped into Spain. That was where the rat lines kind of housed them, because they were, Franco was a fascist himself. So, hey, the more the merrier. He didn't care. He hid Otto Skorzeny there. Otto Skorzeny originally went to Paris because that's where NATO headquarters was going to be, and he was going to work for NATO. He got recognized because he has that big scar on his face, so he had to flee to Spain. And so, yeah, it's all one big quagmire mess. Stellar, go ahead.
It just seems like there's so many of these people that are like hidden. Like you guys were talking about the family. The one that's in Sweden. You guys just talked
Wallenberg.
about it. Wallenberg, yeah. And then, there's other companies and families that you guys haven't mentioned, but I'm waiting for you guys to bring them up, just because there's like questions about their family stuff, and it just seems like the ones that want to be more quiet, like the Cargills, their food industry, they're all over the world, and stuff like that. There's just so many different companies and families that, are hidden because that's what they choose to do. And it just seems like a lot of them might possibly be the ones that are part of this cult thing that wants to dominate the world, like the families, like the Orsinis, the Medicis you brought up.
And like if I find Cargills in here anywhere, I would definitely mention them. I found Monsanto when we did the dig into Argentina, because they went down there and was basically using their napalm bullshit weed killer in the soy fields down there. But I've not found Cargills. I found W.R. Grace. We've talked about them a lot. Yeah, I mean, you guys know me. I'm naming names. If I find them, I'm naming them. But I just have not seen it. And that doesn't mean that they're not there. I just haven't found them.
Okay, yeah, because that is the big mystery. I can't wait till you guys go more dumpster diving into these hidden families that are, because we know that like the Rothschilds, and we know that Soros and all of, the ones that are here too, that screwed up our medical stuff, Rockefellers and all of that. We know that, they're out in the open. So they're just pawns, for distraction. So it's going to be very interesting to find out the hidden stuff. So
yeah, I wouldn't call them pawns. They're active participants.
Okay, active participants, but they're still being led by the string holders, the masters or whatever, right?
Yeah. I definitely think they have a boss. Yeah.
Hey, SR, sorry, I didn't mean to go on.
Go ahead, SR.
Thank you, Colonel. 2 points. First, I want to give a shout out to my son-in-law and my daughter. They're here in the space with us today. So
Oh, cool. Welcome.
Second, the Colonel said at the flip of the switch. And I want you all to understand what a flip of the switch means. Inside of 24 hours, you're going to have hell come down on you. OIT will come down on you. USAID will come down on you. It doesn't matter. They can set up offices in 24 hours. So the flip of a switch is very apropos. Thank you, Colonel.
Thank you. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, Colonel, as you're talking, this was a lot of data, so I'm having trouble digesting it. But best guess, they had to know at some point within their planning that people would figure this shit out. Like, what do you, I know you don't do predictions, but what do you think they have planned for when they are found, to be this crazy?
I don't know. In the past, in the 70s, when it had not been made public yet, they killed you. They blew up your airplane. They shot you in the head. We've got lots of examples of that. If you were a reporter, Danny Casolaro, they slit his wrist. They would just shoot you in the head. If you started writing about exposing their networks, they killed you. That just point blank, that's what they did. After 1990, that everything changed because then, Prime Minister Andreotti had actually outed them all. It was okay to talk about it, but you weren't allowed to go any further than what the information was that he said. So Danny Casolaro actually went a lot farther, and he began tying the drugs and the weapons to basically the Gladio network. And the more he wrote and the more he was tying the covert operations being funded by the drug and weapons market, the more at risk he made himself. And that's what he referred to as the octopus. And it definitely is an octopus, Hydra, whatever you want to call it. And they killed him. So at this point, with all of the people in charge, all of this information is going to come out. You guys are all going to know it before it comes out. But everything that we've been uncovering for the last 2 years, in the next 2 years, everybody's going to know. We are definitely ahead of the game in having found it, exposed it, talked about it. And I think that actually is very interesting because anybody, and I just had this conversation with someone else who's, not a well-known person or anything, that asked me why it is that no one will talk about it. And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, talk about it like, out in public. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Because at this point, all of the information is out there. It's written in, like I said, the 87 books that I have. And actually, I think I'm more than that now. But yeah, it's all out there. All you have to do is put it all together. So anyway, all right. Anybody else?
It's just amazing. I was just going to say, it's just amazing. It's just so amazing about how deep and how far and how long this corruption has gone. You're bringing up stuff today, and we know that this goes back even as far as, the wars and stuff like that, the Bolsheviks and things. But it's just amazing that you've put it all together in so much easier form for us to be able to comprehend. And just so many different layers.
And, you know, that is a very interesting thing for me, which is why I keep buying books and I keep reading, because every book has another piece. It is getting, obviously, kind of monotonous where I have to read 20 pages to get to one nugget. But it's exciting at the same time. It's like finding a puzzle piece, you know, in a whole bunch of blue sky pieces. And every time I find one, it's all the more exciting and kind of just eggs me on to the next book, because every book has some interesting aspect. One of the reasons why I like this book is he does what I do, and he goes way back, you know, obviously to the late 1800s, early 1900s, and brings the information in each of these categories that he's talking about, whether it's the private military aspect of it or whatever. And I loved that, and ties a whole bunch of the pieces that we already found together. And when I found that piece like 2 weeks ago about the World Wildlife Fund, I just about, I didn't want to tell Bridget, I had to surprise her. But I just about fell over dead. And I'm like, someone else found that puzzle piece, because it is hard to find. It is hard to link all of these pieces together. So
That and Waco. Waco comes up in everything. I don't know what is in Waco or why Waco, but it's always Waco. All roads lead to Waco.
there's a lot of roads that lead to Waco. That is true. Baylor University is an enigma. If you guys go over to Data Republican and put in Baylor, y'all would be shocked, not only at the amount of money that goes through Baylor, but they're all over the world. It is shocking to see what Baylor is involved in. Yep. Okay. If that's all we got, we're going to wrap it up a little early today. I appreciate everybody being here. And we will be back tomorrow. We're going to be on the pond tonight at 8:15-ish. And then I am doing an extra space tomorrow. I reposted out the space announcement. I'll find it and post it again, because I don't know where it's at right now. And
I got it. I can grab it and stick it here.
okay, thank you. That is, let's see, let me get back to today. So that's tomorrow. And then it's going to be a little weird on Wednesday and Thursday, because we're not going to have a show on Thursday, guys. My daughter from Austin is flying in Wednesday night. My youngest daughter's birthday is tomorrow. We are definitely going to have a show, but I will probably have to leave a little early for dinner. And then I'm not even sure how the Alpha Warrior show is going to work on Wednesday, but we're going to make it work. And then on Thursday, I will be doing the noon show with War Hamster, but I will not be doing the 4 p.m. show because my oldest daughter, who is flying in from Austin, and my middle daughter and my younger daughter were all going out for my youngest daughter's birthday on Thursday night. So we will be back on Friday, but Friday is going to be an abbreviated day. I may even have to move it up a little bit because the Strawberry Festival starts on Thursday, and our first concert is Friday night, and we're going to see Reba, which is sold out, and I could not be more excited. I've seen her like 4 or 5 times. I love going to her shows. So that is going to be Friday night. So just kind of be flexible with me over the next week and a half. It goes from this Thursday till the following Sunday. So I do have some 3:30 concerts during that time, and I will be going to them and not doing the space that day. But I'll keep you guys updated on when all of that happens. So we're just going to be a
Why
little,
is it called a strawberry festival?
because
Strawberries.
because
They're in season?
yes, they are, honey.
In Florida,
Plants-
they are.
Florida.
Plants,
Yes,
Things in
Florida.
warmth and sunshine.
plants.
Oh,
Hold
I
on.
heard that DeSantis is going to try and get rid of your guys' property taxes there.
So hold on. I don't even want to talk about my property taxes before I talk about the Strawberry Festival. Hello, priorities here. The Strawberry Festival happens in Plant City, Florida, named after Robert Plant, the railroad baron. And Plant City is the winter strawberry capital of the world. And they produce more strawberries during that time than any place else. So, yes, it is strawberry season in Florida. As a matter of fact, last 2 weeks ago, when I went to meet a girlfriend of mine that used to work for me at Syncom for lunch over in Tampa, I took the back way through all the strawberry fields just to check, and there was strawberries everywhere. So it is going, I already have my pre-bought strawberry shortcake tickets, which you can get at the Catholic Church in Plant City. So you can cut the line and go straight to the front of the line because you pre-buy your tickets. I've got, yes.
Strawberry shortcake. I want the recipe.
The church makes it. I don't. I would not make strawberry shortcake because once you have the St. Clement's strawberry shortcake, you could never make strawberry. And they make homemade whipped cream too.
No.
So anyway, you're going to hear a lot about the Strawberry Festival over the next week and a half because I'm all about strawberry. I was called the Strawberry Princess when I was in the Air Force. I'm all about strawberries. So this is my time of the year, and I absolutely love it. So
Please post videos and photos. I love it. I love it.
I will. I absolutely will.
Especially the strawberry shortcake. I am drooling right now.
I'll go find my picture that I took. I got married at the Strawberry Festival. John and I got married there because I know all of the vendors. I went for my entire leave schedule in the Air Force when I was on active duty was around the Strawberry Festival. I came every year. I have a pin for every year, like 35, 37 years on a blue jean jacket that's got rhinestone strawberry designs all over it. Yeah, I'll take pictures. And I will post a picture that was taken a couple of years ago of the strawberry shortcake because it's amazing. All right. Take care, guys. I will see you tonight at the pond and then tomorrow. Take care. All right, guys. I'm going to go look. Thank you for letting me know. And we know. I'm going to go look that up right now. Thank you guys for being over here on Rumble and supporting us. Make sure you give us a thumbs up and make sure you follow us. I use the word subscribe. It's not subscribe, it's follow. Following us helps us show up in people's search engines. Thank you. You guys have a nice evening.